Imagine that an unaccountable private nonprofit group can effectively shut down your business over what amounts to a paperwork snafu. Well, for one Charlotte-based company, that's not imagination, it's real life. And joining us to explain is an attorney working with that company and its owner. Caleb Kruckenberg is a lawyer with the Pacific Legal Foundation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
First of all, tell us, who is your client? Who are you working with on this case in North Carolina?
So my client is Frank Black, and he's someone who's worked in the financial industry for a very long time. I mean, he started in 1971, and he's been a financial planner, an investment advisor. He's sort of worked through all levels, and he started a business called Southeast Investments. They've been around for a long time. They've done really important work. But suddenly, one of his regulators, and a regulator that's not a governmental entity, but is actually a private corporation, decided that not only had he broken some trivial rule, but because of that, Frank has been blacklisted. He's banned from working in the financial industry for the rest of his life.
And you mentioned the agency. This is something called Finra. Tell us what this group is and how it can have this sort of impact when it's not even really a government agency.
Well, Finra it's hard to pin down, and it depends on who you ask, but the financial industry regulatory authority is a private company. It's a corporation incorporated in Delaware, and it was set up by the federal government to help enforce the securities laws. But it sits in this weird area where it is a private company. It has private employees. Nobody is a governmental actor there, but it's enforcing federal law. And anyone in the nation who works in the securities industry has to be registered with FINRA and agree to follow their rules and also follow federal rules. And FINRA has decided that it is allowed to enforce federal laws against any of its members. And so essentially it has become one more government regulator in this really strange setup that Congress, I guess, decided to greenlight years ago.
Now, I described this in the opening as sort of a paperwork snafu. You mentioned it. I think the word you used, relatively trivial matter. What is it that FINRA says that your client has done that has caused him to, as you said, effectively get blacklisted?
Well, FINRA has a rule, and it's not unreasonable, that for certain financial services companies, if they have branch offices, they have to supervise them. They need to have a principal, someone with responsibility goes to those offices and make sure they're following the rules. So Frank, even before the COVID pandemic made work from home really common, hired independent contractors who worked from their home as a part of the business. Now, everybody assumed that was okay. FINRA didn't have any problems with it until suddenly FINRA decided, just really out of the blue, every remote worker was their own branch office. And Frank had to prove that he had been doing site inspections, had been closely monitoring these home offices, which he had been doing. But because there was no requirement before FINRA just suddenly decided there was, he didn't have perfect records to prove how closely he'd been supervising. And for that, FINRA decided that he could no longer work in the industry.
And when you say that he could no longer work in the industry, tell us exactly what FINRA said that he couldn't do. It's we say blacklisted. There's money involved. There's operational restraints. What all did FINRA do to it?
Well, they fined him. They fined him several $100,000, but frankly, that's the least of the issue, because it said that he can never associate with a member. And that's like a very sort of technical way of putting it. But as I said, if you want to work in the financial industry in America, you are required to be a member of FINRA. And so if you want to sell securities, give investment advice, all sorts of things, well, that means that Frank is not allowed to associate with anybody in the business. He can't be an employee. He can't be an owner. He can't work in the only industry that he's ever worked in since 1971.
And this is basically what you'd call a lifetime ban.
It is. It is a lifetime ban. It's an explicit lifetime ban. And, Frank is the, he was supposed to, when all this happened, he was looking towards retirement. He was looking towards setting up his business to continue without him, with his son. And now Finra said, too bad, you're out. We're going to destroy you. We're going to destroy your company as you're sort of walking to retirement. I mean, it really is trying, I think, to throw away his entire life's work.
So now he's working with you and Pacific Legal Foundation. What's the argument now that you're going to court on his behalf?
Well, it's actually not that complicated. If something is acting like the government, they have to follow the rules like the government. And the US Constitution sets up a bunch of rules for how we punish people, how we take away their right to earn a living. And normally, if the government accuses you of doing something wrong, well, you get to defend yourself. You get to have they can only convict you if you violate laws that Congress authorized. They can only punish you after you go to court, in a real court, in front of a judge and potentially a jury. But here, the whole process has been in FINRA. It's these sort of kangaroo courts where FINRA, this private company, they wrote the rule, they are adjudicating allegations against my client, and they're also prosecuting it. Everybody's a FINRA employee but Frank in these proceedings. And that's just not the way the Constitution allows the government to operate.
And I guess other than now filing this suit, which he's doing with your help, there was no other course of appeal within the government?
Well, the only course of appeal is he could ask the Securities and Exchange Commission to review the decision that FINRA issued against him under a very deferential standard, where basically the SEC would look to just if it was at all plausible or at all possible that he had violated these rules. But the problem is he submitted his appeal 4 years ago, and the SEC they've never said a word about it. It's just pending endlessly. And I think we can all kind of suspect that what's really happening here is there is no real process, and they're just trying to drag it out forever. And that's not okay with us. And that's why we've sued now. We're trying to get to court immediately.
Obviously, this is of interest to Frank Black and Southeast Investments, his company based in Charlotte. Why should people who aren't involved in this industry, who are just average taxpayers, average citizens, why should they care about the way that this outfit is operating and the way that it's treated your client?
Because this is, I think, an example of an alarming trend about the government outsourcing its responsibility and also outsourcing the constitutional protections that we hold very dear. So FINRA controls everybody in the financial industry. If you're in the financial industry, obviously that's a big concern for you. But this is just an example. Congress is doing this in a lot of different areas. And we could imagine, for instance, if Congress said, if you want to work as a plumber anywhere in the United States, you have to follow the Private Plumber Association and their rules, and they get to adjudicate fines against you, and they can throw you out. They can ban you from working as a plumber forever if they want to, and you have no process. And I say that seems kind of like a silly example, but this is something the government is doing a lot. They've recently set up a similar kinds of commission for horse racing. I mean, this is something that's happening all over the country, particularly in the federal government, and it's something we should be really concerned about.
Do we have any precedents, case law that suggests that courts will look at this and say, oh, yes, clearly what FINRA is doing is wrong? Or is this going to be sort of new ground to cover?
Well, this is new ground, but there's some interesting developments. I think historically, courts have been kind of hands off, and they've allowed these kinds of things to act or to play out. recently, and based on some of the things that the Supreme Court has been telling us, there's been some real development. And there's actually a similar kind of case being litigated right now in Washington, D.C., where the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals stopped the enforcement proceeding in Finra because somebody had made similar arguments. So I think there's a lot of momentum here. This is going to be the first case like this in this jurisdiction, and I think this is going to be an important case. But I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic and to think that the courts are going to do the right thing here.
Well, certainly an important case for your client, an important case in the Charlotte area and in North Carolina. And it sounds as if very important on a national scale as well. We'll be following it with interest. Caleb Kruckenberg is an attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.